fantastic. If you are not happy to have your camera on, that's completely understandable. All right, so everybody knows that one of the things that if you've come to any of my parent carer sessions, I like to do is start with a quiz. So I'm going to go through the quiz first. Feel free to jot them on paper or just, answer in your head, because I'll go through all the questions first and then I'll answer them from there. And Vanessa, let me know if any of the technology goes wrong along the way. Fingers crossed it won't happen. All right, so there's two topics, obviously, that we talk to your children about. We had 2 lessons of cyber safety and 1 lesson of drug education. And the drug education lesson was today. So we're going to go through these questions. So Aussie kids spend an average of 5 hours a day watching TV or on the computer. Now, this research is pre-pandemic. We actually just anecdotally know that we're finding it hard to get our kids off because they've had so much time on. And again, this is not for school or for education, this is recreation time. So the average is 5 hours a day. The experts, health experts, education experts, psychologists say that that's obviously too much. What's the maximum amount of time they should be spending? And like I say, I'll come back at the end of this presentation and give the answers. These are the 5 drugs or use of drugs we talked about with your students. So analgesics, caffeine, nicotine, alcohol, and vaping. There's only one of those that's not potentially addictive. We want you to have a think about it, or which one of those is not addictive. And question 3, what percentage of Aussie parents do not actively monitor their children's activity online? So they might check in every now and then, but they're not actively monitoring them. And look, just again, a little word about tonight. Tonight is not to make anybody feel bad or like a lousy parent. It's all about arming ourselves with knowledge. So I don't want anyone going away feeling bad. All right, question 4. How many active monthly users does TikTok have worldwide? So these are people who are actively interacting with the app. Is it 100 million, 500 million, or 1 billion? So active monthly users worldwide, 100, 500 million, or 1 billion. Question 5, which of these is not a concern with vaping, with using e-cigarettes? Is it A, damage to eyesight, B, lung irritation and damage, or C, there's some research indicating that it can possibly lead to smoking cigarettes? And question 6, no surprise, we know that technology is a big source of conflict for a lot of families. But how many families say it's one of the biggest sources of conflict for them? Is it A, 25%? So a quarter, B, 33%, C, 66%, so 2/3, or D, 75%, 3/4. So what percentage of Aussie families say that technology is one of the biggest sources of concern? 25, 33, 66, and 75. And our last page of questions. So we don't have the stats for Australia, but I imagine they're very similar. How many American teenagers aged 14 or over sleep with their phones next to them? So not even in their room, but literally in their beds. A, 92%, B, 86%, C, 78%. Question 8, the number of teenagers in Australia who smoke cigarettes over recent years has A, increased, B, decreased, or C, stayed about the same. Question 9, which is the main neurochemical released in social media interactions or gaming? So all of those are released to a point, but which is the main one? Is it cortisol, which is a stress hormone? Is it adrenaline? I think we all know what adrenaline is, our fight or flight. Is it dopamine, which is the motivation hormone? Or oxytocin, which is sometimes known as the hug hormone? So cortisol, stress hormone, adrenaline, fight or flight hormone, dopamine, the motivator, or oxytocin, sometimes known as the hug hormone. And this last question particularly is why we don't want your children watching tonight, because we are going to cover this topic. In 2020, so very, very recently, an internet filter installed on children's devices in some Sydney schools found that what percentage of students under 8 had attempted to access. Might just get people to mute themselves. Sorry, folks. You could just mute yourselves. Thank you. So in 2020, an internet filter installed on children's devices in schools found what percentage of students under 8 had attempted to access online pornography, so sexual content, 5%, 15%, 25%, or 33%. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing and go through the answers with you. So it's not a test, it's just a quiz. And if you can just make sure your children aren't in the room just because of the content. And also if you're on mute, that just makes it a bit easier for us to get through the content. I will take questions through the chat or live at the end. I'm also going to give you my email. So if there's a question that you don't necessarily want to ask in the public forum, but you'd like to ask privately, I'll definitely give you time to do that as well. All right, so the first question was that Australian kids are spending on an average 5 hours. So the teachers would know that we have some children who come to school whose parents have very strong rules about screens and they get no screen time during the week. But we do also, unfortunately, regularly see children who are allowed to game maybe even for 8 hours on, on the weekend. So the average is in the middle. So 5 is the average. Does anyone want to have a guess at what the recommended top is by the experts? Probably 1. In the chat if you're feeling brave. Oh, it's a bit more than 1. I'm afraid it's 2, but 2 is still a lot less than 5. Yeah. And also they don't have to do 2. So if they've done 1, it's not like they're owed. So what we know is that when children spend too long on devices, and a lot of you will have seen this, we have mood swings, which is related to some of those hormones and moods and stuff that we see as they go, that are more likely to have issues with school because they're spending time doing things that aren't academic based, open themselves up to some of those addictions that come with being online, and just generally have less exercise. So we say to kids these days to think about your screen time almost like you think about money. You've only got so much of it to spend. What are you going to spend it on? And if you get home and you just chuck on YouTube and you sit there eating your toast and just watching stuff, that's not really your favorite thing. You're wasting your money. You're wasting your screen money, for want of a better term. So 2 hours is the absolute maximum. We know that after 2 hours, there are a whole bunch of harms. And when we talk to our kids about being on devices, the best approach is to kind of come from a harm approach, because kids love their devices. So if we just say don't do it, that tends not to work. But what we know is if we explain to children why some of these things are harmful, that's much better. Look, I've just seen in the chat someone's asked for a copy of the presentation. Absolutely. I'll send that through to Vanessa later on, and she'll make sure that all parents can access it. All right, which of these drugs is not addictive? So we talk to your children about 5 drugs or 5 uses of drugs. We talk about analgesics, so Panadol, things like that, caffeine, nicotine, alcohol, and vaping, all of which are legal in Australia. So that's the other thing. We don't talk to children about a legal drug. Some of them are quite disappointed. They thought it was going to be a nice, juicy session talking about illegal drugs. But we explain to the kids, these are not the drugs you need to think about in primary school. And a lot of them are not even the ones that you need to think about in high school. But all of these things, vaping, caffeine, alcohol, analgesics, nicotine, are in our community. And the only one of those that doesn't have addictive properties is analgesics, which is Panadol. So all of those other ones that are legal are addictive. Now, do I love my morning cup of coffee? The kids have heard me say it all day. Absolutely, I love it. But it's talking about that line with some of the things like caffeine, between, again, looking at a harm management approach. So even the ones, and quite often kids will say, well, why don't we just ban things like cigarettes and alcohol? And we know because in the past, historically, when we've banned those things, that hasn't worked. So the best approach is education. All right, question 3, what percentage of Australian parents do not actively manage their child's online behaviour? It was 15, 25, 40 or 60%. The answer is 60%. So it's most parents. So if you're sitting there feeling a bit guilty or a bit bad because maybe you haven't monitored your kids' online behaviour, The reality is that it's complicated. It's hard. It takes a lot of organisation and energy. And it's something that a lot of parents are struggling to do. And I know the teachers will have had this experience. I've definitely had it, where parents feel just a bit powerless to actually manage their kids' online behaviour. So we are going to talk about why that is so important, particularly with younger students, kids under 16, as we go along tonight. All right, question 4. How many active monthly users does TikTok have? 100 million, 500 million, or 1 billion? Is it kind of intuitive? Yeah, it's 1 billion. So it's 1 billion people who actively are online with TikTok. So TikTok at the moment is the platform of choice for kids, along with Snapchat. It'll probably change again in 6 months. And there are some cute little things on TikTok. There are, puppy dogs and pussycats and babies being cute. And a lot of kids, when they first get onto TikTok, they're just after that really cute content. But if you think about the fact that there are 1 billion active users, it also means it's a bit of an unknown quantity. And even when I've been on TikTok, there are things that are coming out of Ukraine at the moment. And although they are news, they're not things you'd want children to see. So again, being aware of what apps our kids are using, what content might be on it, and how many other users there are is really important. And again, I'll give you resources at the end of the night to make it really easy to look into some of this stuff. All right, now vaping is the new drug issue of choice. So vaping was not something we ever talked about in drug education 5 years ago. But just with the amount of teenagers we see taking vaping up, let alone in the wider population, it's something we feel the need to talk to kids about, because kids are always talking to us about it. Kids are always saying, oh, I saw some teenagers vaping at the high school. So vaping was originally introduced theoretically as something that people could do to help them give up cigarettes. So a way that they could still maybe have a habit that they were forcing, but without the damage. But the research is starting to really build that most vapes do have nicotine and that there are harms associated with them. But the research is still quite new, so we can't definitively say, we don't have the knowledge about them, say that we have about alcohol or cigarette, but there is a building kind of body of knowledge about the fact they're not just these kind of safe, helpful things that maybe they were purported to be. So which of these is not a concern with vaping or e-cigarettes? Is it damage to eyesight? Is it lung irritation or lung damage? Or it can possibly lead to people smoking cigarettes. At the moment, the research is saying that both B and C are real issues. So damage to eyesight is not a proven risk, but damage to lungs is very much and at a faster rate than cigarette smoking, particularly for younger children. The other thing we know is that with younger children, again, so this is not an issue for grown-ups, but for younger children, for teenagers, it might lead to smoking cigarettes. So again, I think a lot of people have kind of been sold on the lie by the vaping companies that, it's fine and it's no big deal and it's not bad for, smoking any of that sort of stuff. But I think talking to your children about the risks is really important. Recognition, talk with kids. I'm sorry, I'm just reading through the chat. So someone just said, towards the harm effect, any recommendation, prioritizing for talk with kids, physical, brain, eyes, growth, social. Again, I'm going to give you some websites at the end. We've tried to cover a few of those things, but the ongoing chats with your students are really important. So I promise I'll give you some websites at the end that'll make it easier to have lots of that information about the physical growth, because different kids will be interested in different things. So if you've got a super sporty kid, that kid's going to really want to keep his or her sportiness going, and you might take it from that angle. If you've got a kid who really cares about their appearance, then you might be able to talk to them about the way that these things affect their skin. So I think that you want to kind of think about what's important to your child and talk about it from their point of view. All right. Now, none of you on here will be surprised. Absolutely none of you will be surprised that conflict around technology is really, really common. So if you've been driving yourself nuts over lockdown or before or after because of the frustration about technology, don't feel alone. So what percentage of Aussie families say that technology is one of the biggest sources, not just a source, but one of the things they most regularly fight about? The answer to that was C, 66%. So a full 2/3 of us as Australian families feel as though this is something that we are arguing about regularly. And again, I'm going to give you some tips at the end for how you can manage it, because it is exhausting and certainly something that our parents didn't have to deal with. We get to be the guinea pig generation doing this for the first time. All right, final 4 questions. Question 7, how many American teenagers sleep with their phones next to them? And again, when I say next to them, it's either right beside them on their bedside table or it's in their bed. The answer is 92%. Now, if you forget almost everything I tell you tonight about technology, I'm going to ask you this one thing. Please, please, please do not let your children have devices in their room at night time. Teachers, can I hear an amen? Amen. All right. Because nearly always the big issues that we have, serious cyberbullying, kids being contacted by strangers, inappropriate content, sexting, nearly all of that we find happens in children's bedrooms when they have unsupervised access to a device. Now, it's not that kids are super, super naughty. It's just these things are so tempting. They're very addictive. And if they're in their bedrooms, even the best kid is going to be tempted to access them. And that's when we find all the problems happen. And things that might happen, like cyberbullying, like nasty words in the bedroom at nighttime, overflow into the classroom at school. And we find that those issues that, are online are actually real the next day when we want kids to be happy coming to school, when we want kids to do their best learning. So if you forget everything else, even if your kids hate you, blame me. Say it was Kate's fault. Yeah. Devices in the bedroom at nighttime for children are just a bad, bad idea. I know I've made my point, but you can see how passionate I am. All right, some good news. The number of teenagers in Australia who smoke cigarettes in recent years has actually decreased. So there are less kids smoking cigarettes than there were when I was a teenager, and there were less when I was a teenager than when my parents were a teenager. And nearly all of that is about knowledge. Also some practical things like taxation and costs, and that's all fantastic. But if we educate our children about these issues, cyber safety and drugs, we give them a better chance to make good decisions. And I know we've talked about vaping before. There is very, very little information being given to teenagers about vaping. And surprise, surprise, it's mushrooming. So the more information we give our kids, the better. All right, 2 more questions. Question 9, which is the main neurochemical released in social media or interaction gaming? So there's 4 I mentioned. One is cortisol. Cortisol is a stress hormone. One is adrenaline, which is your fight or flight hormone. One is dopamine, which is your motivator hormone. Do it more, do it more. And one is oxytocin, which is your hug hormone. Actually, all of those chemicals are released in our brains when we are spending time on social media or gaming. But the one that is released the most, which explains a lot of behavior, is dopamine. It's the motivator hormone. It's the same hormone that's released when people go to the casino and play the pokies. And we all know the stories of people just losing their money, knowing they should stop, but they can't. So sometimes we look at our children and we're like, why can't they just get off that device? It's driving me crazy. There is something inherent in the devices and in the software and in the games that actually is changing the brain chemistry. And I say to the kids that probably the last time they tantrumed was when they was about 2 or 2.5. And, mummy or daddy or step parent didn't buy them a chocolate bar. Now we see kids tantruming at the age of 10, 11, 12, 15, 16. And it's really strange behavior. And even kids will go, yeah, it's weird. It's weird because there's this chemical reaction happening in their brain that is really strong and is very much associated with things like addiction. All right, and the last one, and I know this can be sad, but it's important again, and this particular conversation is why we don't have our children on tonight. In 2020, so this is not very long ago, and remember, we've been online a lot more in the last 2 years. In 2020, an internet filter company installed on children's devices in Sydney, here in Australia, found what percentage of children under 8, so grade 3, under 8, had attempted to access online pornography. A, 5%, B, 15%, C, 25%, or D, 33%? The answer is D. It's a full 1/3. Now, I really want to talk to you about this tonight, not to scare you, not to make you upset, not to make you throw your hands up in horror, but because it is a real challenge for us as families and our children that, again, we didn't have to deal with. Now, the thing I would say about children accessing or being curious about sexual online content is, again, it's not because they're naughty, okay? It's not like they're just naughty kids and they want to look at naughty things. It's because kids are naturally curious. So children are naturally curious. They hear this thing about sex. They might hear about it in pop music, might hear it from their friends, might see something on TV, and the grown-ups are all really weird about it. So they want to find out about it. But if they go to Google or any search engine and type in sex, the reality is they're going to quite likely access something that is really upsetting and potentially damaging. Let's be honest, grown-ups, how many of you, when you're at school, looked up a rude word in the dictionary? Yeah, there we go. The few of you with your cameras on, I can see doing that cute little guilty grin. Thank you for that. It was most of us because we were curious. The difference is when we saw that word in the dictionary, it didn't have a big effect on us. We kind of probably giggled and walked off. If your children are seeing explicit sexual content online, it runs a lot of risks. It runs really upsetting them because they don't want to tell you because they know maybe they've done something naughty, but it can really affect them. We also know that pornography, again, produces dopamine. So some kids are very vulnerable to developing addiction. 20 years ago, I've been doing this a long time. I also do some counseling. 20 years ago, when I used to do addiction counseling, it was nearly always around marijuana. So I would be talking to kids about giving up marijuana. That hardly ever happens now. I spend nearly all my time when I'm talking to children, and I mean children, some as young as 12, talking about pornography addictions. And it's not because they're bad kids. They're quite often miserable, but they've just had access to something their brain is not ready for, and also emotionally they're not ready for. So again, I will give you resources at the end of the night. Don't despair, but I just want us to be aware of what we're tackling with. All right, I just want to share what we've done in the lessons so that you know what we've talked about and what we haven't talked about as well. So we've done 2 cyber safety lessons. So in our cyber safety lessons, we always reinforce the importance of talking to an adult if something goes wrong. And if they're feeling like they can't tell their parents or carers because they'll kill them, we talk about other resources, including Kids Helpline. And Australia also has the only Children's e-Safety Commissioner. So we showed them the website too. We talk about cyberbullying and that if you see something, what you can do to stop it spreading. And also, again, if you are feeling as though something really nasty or cruel is being said to you, how do you not keep watching it? How do you go to your grown-ups? We've talked about addiction and the reason those brain chemicals kick in and make it hard to stop. We've talked about online friends and how big tech, how the big platforms, YouTube, Snapchat, Instagram, all of those big platforms knowingly manipulate children's and users' brains, knowing the harms. So I just want to show you one of the activities that we do. So one of the activities that we do is we say, we want you to imagine you've come home, you've hopped onto your favorite online game or your favorite platform, and you've had 4 friend requests. And we say, you've got to pick based on the information this friend has shared online, one of them. So the first friend is a boy, he's a soccer fan. This is the information the children get. He's funny, he's 12, he likes the same music as you. Second friend, who's a female, same favorite TV shows and movies. She's 21, she lives in America, she loves shopping. Third friend loves YouTube, TikTok, also a female. 11, wants to be a vet, plays netball and basketball. And your fourth friend is a male. He's 12 years old, knows some famous AFL, AFW players, and we kind of sell it to the kids like, oh, you know, his dad's a manager and he gets to meet these people, lives in a nearby suburb and likes the same online games as you. And I'll go through, and it's different for different classes, but then we turn the information around and show them this is the real information. So your first friend, we said he was a soccer fan, funny 12-year-old, liked the same music. That was all true. And then we say to those students, were you lucky or were you clever? And it's good to hear most kids are saying, oh, yeah, we were lucky, we didn't know. Our second friend has the same favourite TV shows, that's true. They're not 21-year-old, they're 7, which is pretty hilarious for the kids who are so excited to have a grown-up friend. Doesn't live in America, lives in Croydon and loves shopping, which is true. And we talk about the risk of being online and saying you're older than you are, is that people will believe you and people might share content that might be okay for adults, but isn't okay for kids. Our third friend, the female, yes, she loves YouTube and TikTok. Is she 11? No, she's 26-year-old. Does she want to be a vet? She doesn't. She's already got a job. She's a policewoman, but she does play netball and basketball. And we talk about the fact that, yes, there are police, there is law enforcement who are online trying to keep it safe, but there's not enough of them and they're not on every platform. So how we use our internet and what we share particularly is super important. And our fourth friend, and there's always a few kids standing here, is he 12? No, he's 46. And when we turn that around, that always gets a big reaction from kids. And they say things like, what a creep. I'm like, yes, what a creep. Doesn't know famous people, doesn't live in the same suburb, but does play some online games. Now, the reason we do that activity with your kids is we know, again, from research that over 50% of kids have regular interactions with people online who they do not know. They might do it through a shared game. They might do it through a platform. If kids are on social media platforms, it's kind of a sign of status to have like lots of online friends. So kids might be talking with people who they don't know. Now, a lot of those people might just be other kids, but with this many people online, we cannot guarantee their safety. So we've said to your children, please don't share your images online. Don't share pictures of you online, okay? Don't share what school you go to. Don't share your address. You can share other things. You can share pictures of famous people, your favorite, but the less personal information they have about themselves, the safer they are. And then we throw it over and we say, okay, and a lot of kids say, oh, I don't have my photo online. We're like, fantastic, great, great, great. And then I say, how many of your parents or carers have photos of you on their social media? And they all kind of put their hand up and we're like, yeah, we understand it because, you know, parents are proud and all of that sort of stuff. But, you know, 600,000 Facebook pages get hacked every day. We don't know the number for Instagram, but Facebook owns Instagram, so you can't imagine it's any less. So when children share information, we share information about children, we know that there is a risk of that information getting out. And that's not just me being kind of grumpy and a wowser. The Australian Federal Police themselves, based on what they know about what is going on online, recommend people don't share their photos. I know it can seem counterintuitive. It's called Facebook. Shouldn't you share your face? The recommendation from police isn't, but at the very least, our children who are still vulnerable and learning how to negotiate the world need to be safe. So those are the main things we talk about with our cyber safety. With our drug ed, first of all, they do a lesson in class where they get given the 5 drugs. So caffeine, nicotine, vaping, analgesics, and they then have come up with body maps. So I had a look at them today. They're pretty hilarious, most of them. And they have a look at what message the drug sends the brain, effects on the body, and also whether it has effects socially. Today, we spent most of our time talking about why people use drugs and dividing them into good and bad reasons. So good reasons, if a doctor's prescribed you medicine, if you have an asthma puffer, well, obviously that's a really good reason. That's an important reason for you to be using drugs. But if it's self-esteem and peer pressure, and vaping was the example we used, you're doing something that's harmful for you because you don't feel confident or strong enough in yourself to say no to your friends. So we had a bit of a chat about self-confidence and liking yourself. We did a bit of maths around the costs of smoking, and we also talked about alternative use to analgesics. So the reason that we talk again to your children about these drugs, I've just had a message about someone who is still learning English. I will send this presentation to the teachers. The teachers will get this information, and then you can go through it slowly. Also, I am recording this, so again, you can go through it slowly. But again, contact the teachers. They can help you as well. Yeah. So don't be shy to contact the teachers. Okay. So just again, what we're trying to do with the cyber safety and with the drug education is not to tell children, be good little children, don't be naughty. What we're trying to tell them is, hey, there are some harms here and some risks as well. We want you to be happy and healthy. We want you to have the best possible childhood and time at school you can. This is the way to do it. And if we talk to our children and explain things, we've got a really good understanding. So I'm just aware we've got about 20 minutes left. I just want to go through some of the things that can help with managing technology use. So most of the rest of this presentation will be on how we manage technology, because I think that's the new area that we're all trying to get our heads around and to manage with our children. All right, so I would say these are some of the essentials, is to educate yourself. So just the fact that you have come online tonight, that you are prepared to give an hour of your time to have this time with me and maybe have some questions, is already such an important step. As I said, you know, a lot of this is new to us, and we are learning as we go. And even for myself, who teaches this, there are always new things happening. So having an open mind and getting good information is so important. Co-share social networking. So if your child wants Instagram or Snapchat or any online game, I strongly, strongly recommend you using a shared password that you can access as well as them. And that way you can check what they're doing, make sure they're safe, make sure who they're talking to. Now, kids do go behind their parents' back with this, but I think that's different. If they do that, they know they're doing it, which is a different thing than if they just stumble across something. Use family contracts. I'll show you a couple of those in a minute. Have technology-free or sacred space times. What I mean by that is things like dinner time. At dinner time, I think everybody in the house, put your phones away, because we want to teach our children there are times that we don't want to be, you know, connected. We don't want to be connected 24/7. A lot of you, hopefully, your children brought home the homework from the technology-free evening, which was as a family to do something for 3 hours that didn't involve screens. Now, what's really interesting, since we first started teaching this years ago, we now have children saying to us, my parents will never do that. So it used to be children saying, I will never do it. And now parents say to me, my mum is addicted to her phone. My dad is addicted to his phone. So role modeling that we need sacred space is important. And again, things like our children's sports games, or things where they really, you know, they want you to look at them and be seeing them. Those are the times to not be on our devices. I was at a friend's kids' basketball game a couple of weeks ago, and there was this one dad just sitting here, and he was on his device the whole time, and his kid just kept going, Dad, Dad. And it was like, oh, I'm sure he's busy. I'm sure he's got responsibilities, but that would be one of the times that we don't get on our devices. And it's essential for role modeling. Don't worry, if you have to go, I will definitely send the video through tomorrow. I know some people have got other commitments, that's fine. All right. Remove technologies in logical, expected and reasonable ways. So if your child doesn't pick up their wet towel, that's not the time to ban them from their device for a week. it's a bit complicated, because if our child does something dangerous on their bike, we tend to say, well, you can't have your bike for 2 weeks. But if we just start removing technology in unexpected ways, what we know is children actually get a little bit sneaky, and they're normally better with the technology than we are. So we want them to understand, if you do this, this is what will happen. You know, if you argue with me about getting off the device, it will be 10 minutes less tomorrow. If we see you being cruel online, you will not get your device for a week, whatever it is in your family. Model the internet technology use you want. We've talked about that. Talk and ask. So keep talking to your children about what they're doing, whether they're seeing good things online, whether they're seeing bad things online, what they think. If you keep that communication open, you've got a much better chance of finding things out. Don't be slow to ask for advice or help. And again, teachers are a great place to start with that, because they've already got a lot of knowledge. And then set limits and stick to them. So if you say to your child, we're only going to have this much screen time during a school week, stick to it. And I'll get to that in a minute, because that can be hard to enforce. Yeah. So I just quickly, and I'm not going to read this through, but it's just an example, show you a family contract. So as I said before, Australia is the only country in the world with an e-safety commissioner. Okay. And on the website, which I'll show you at the end, there are some examples of contracts. So before, you know, you get your child that online game or that social media, talk about what the rules are for safe and what information they can share. So that's just an example of a child's one, but also there's a grown-ups one. And it's like, okay, as a grown-up, I'm actually going to pay attention. It's like, this is something we do as a family. When it comes to being safe, we're a team. So it's looking at those sorts of things together. Just before I get to the final part, because I want to talk a little bit about styles of parenting, are there any questions before we go forward that people either want to put in the chat or just want to ask bravely on the microphone? We are definitely going to finish on time then. Hey, as I said, I will share my email at the end. So if there's any questions that you don't want to necessarily ask in front of people, feel free to email me in the next few days, and I'll normally get back within a day or two. So final bit of information, I want to talk about parenting styles. And again, if you've sat in any of my forums, you'll be like, well, Kate, why do you always do this? Because I think it's such a useful way to think about how we parent, rather than kind of just guess what we should be doing, thinking about what we know. So 4 styles: authoritarian parent, which is low love, but high limits. So the parent has all the power. The parent is clearly the boss. Decisions are made for the child without discussion or exclamation. So we say to things, children, while you live under my roof, you'll obey my rules, or because I said so, that's why. And it can come across as cold and firm. So sometimes this can be like the very strict parenting. Now, again, parents don't do it because they don't love their children. They're doing it because they love their children and they want to protect their children. So if I put in lots of rules, then those rules will keep my child safe. The only problem is that, particularly with things that children really want to do, and again, we've talked about the role of dopamine, if we always just say no to our children, children can become either very passive and not know how to stand up, and they need to learn that because they're going to need to stand up to people in their life, or they can become a little bit sneaky. Okay, so I'm working with a family at the moment who's got a daughter, and they've been very strict with their technology use. It's complicated. They're doing a great job, but she's been quite sneaky. So when they banned her from her phone, she started accessing some inappropriate content on her laptop. When they took her laptop out of her room, she went and accessed it on her Switch. So we don't want our children to feel as though they can't talk to us about anything, because we want to know if there's things that they're doing that might be risky. So again, we might think it's a good idea. Maybe it's the way we were parented, but it's not the best for getting results for our children in terms of their safety and communication. All right, indulgent parenting, very kind, very generous, very soft parenting. Children have a lot of power. And I think I've talked to teachers at Doncaster Primary and other teachers over the years, and we've seen a real increase in this sort of parenting. And again, it's because as parents, we don't want our children to be upset. So we don't want to say no to them because they might be upset. But boundaries are not set or enforced. And in the real world, there are boundaries. So we want to have children understand how boundaries work. It's warm and it's soft. Now, again, the issue with this parent, apart from the fact that we want our children to understand boundaries, is that also children can tantrum at any age. We talked before about children tantruming when something goes wrong on their device. Teenagers tantruming is a nightmare. They might not throw themselves on the ground and scream and kick, but if you've got a teenager and you've seen a teenage tantrum, you know exactly what it looks like. And we know that if you keep saying yes and yes and yes to your child, even when it's not necessarily good for them, or you feel as though that's not a good boundary, children can become very demanding and tantrumy, which might, work for them at home, but it won't work for them in the real world. It won't work for them in the real world. So we want our children to have boundaries and understand those boundaries. All right, the final two. The next one is indifferent parenting. Now, none of you would be indifferent parents or you wouldn't be here tonight. For indifferent parenting, life is all about the parent. So it might be really indulgent one day and it might be really authoritarian the next day. And it's really confusing. Children don't know what to expect or what to behave. There's not much interest in the child's needs. Now, again, this might be because parents are having their own struggles, maybe mental health or something. I say this because the children of these parents might become the friends of our children. And then they come to our house and we have rules around, well, no devices at the table. And they'll say, well, in my house, I can be on my device whenever I want. And we might say, well, no devices in the bedroom. And they'll say, well, in my house, I can be on my device whenever I want. So the key to that is to be patient with those children and to understand that they are just feeding back what they're seeing at home. And even though it can be difficult for us as a family to have that happening in our home, what we're doing is role modeling some of those really healthy boundaries. Yeah. So the last one that I want to talk about is assertive parenting or authoritative parenting. And this is the one we all want to work with. So it's high love, lots of love, but also high limits or high boundaries. And those boundaries, those limits come down as children get older. So we, as the parents, as the carers, set really clear boundaries. But children are allowed some power within those boundaries. So they can question things. They might be able to ask us why. It's not that we just say, this is what's happening. There's still discussion around it. We explain why things are happening. It's warm, but it's firm. And it has the best outcomes for children. So when I say warm and I firm, children need affirmation. Children need to be told they're loved. Children need to be told they're good at things. Yeah. And children need to be encouraged for trying, even if they haven't succeeded at something. If you can see they really tried and they didn't give up, children really need that. It really helps them grow. It helps them learn. But also when I say firm, every family has their what I call non-negotiables. And those are rules that in your family, they might be different from another family, but they just will not change, okay? In my family, there was two. One was that my daughter was never going to schoolies, never going to schoolies. And I started telling her very, very young, you will never go to schoolies. The other one was that she would never go in high school to a party without myself or one of her other grown-ups checking that there was another adult there. Now, she knew this from a really young age. And when she was in year 7, that was fine. When she was in year 8, not great, but she loved it. In year 9, she hated it. But we had been telling her for a long time what to expect. This was a non-negotiable. So make sure if there are really strong rules in your family that children know about it, but also explain it. Hey, explaining those rules to children doesn't mean they'll like them. So me explaining to Gracie, hey, I want to make, she didn't care. It was just embarrassing, but it wasn't just, this is what we're doing. So just to finish off, these are the resources that I mentioned at the start, and I'll go through them. And like I said, I will send this presentation through to the teachers. So up the top, the esafety.gov.au. This is the one we showed your children. It is a great resource for parents, but they also have a children's section. It is so, so, so good. It has information about gaming. It has information about cyberbullying. There's information about feeling unsafe online. It is really, really good. It's a good one to actually look at with your children, because that way they know that even if they're a bit worried to tell you something or they don't know how to explain it, that's a place they can start to get some information. This second one is such a good resource, commonsensemedia.org. This is developed for grown-ups who maybe their child is playing a computer game or their child's on a social media platform and they don't understand it, they don't know about it. You can go onto this website and find out about it. Is this computer game age appropriate? If my child is on this computer game, do they talk to strangers online? So it's a great place to start. That third one, raisingchildren.net.au, is just general information about parenting your children, about managing tantrums, about managing technology, managing mental health. Fantastic. And that last one, kidshealth.org, that's a great place to get information about things like vaping. So they've got information that will explain what vaping is to children, explains about nicotine, explains about addiction. Again, those are 4 just really good starting websites, and they'll often lead you to other ones. There's a TED talk there that I just think is one of the best for reminding us about being happy, you know, really pursuing our joy, and why our screens and screen time actually makes us less happy. It's not a long one. I think it's less than kind of 12 minutes. Again, it's worth sitting down with your partner, worth sitting down with your kids, and just spending a bit of time looking at. Now, we talked about online pornography before. It is a real issue, not just for high schools. It is a real issue in primary schools. And again, even if you are protecting your child, you don't know what the situation is in some other child's household. And maybe they are accessing things that you would never see in your house and talking to their friends about it. So www, It's Time We Talk, got a section for parents, it's got a section for educators, and it's got a section for children. Now, it is not for your children, it is for high school age children, but I would really encourage you to go on there, educate yourself, and learn some kind of tactics for how do I even talk to my child about this? This is all brand new. And then last one, there's a great podcast called How the iPhone Rewrote the Teenage Brain. That's about the brain chemicals. And down there's my website and my socials. So again, I know that's a lot of information, but I will send it through to Vanessa, who will share it with the teachers. I will share the recording so that if you're managing English or I've just talked too fast, which I also know I'm bound to do, you can look at it in your own time. But also feel free to email me, because there's lots of resource and lots of help out there. Sometimes it's hard to know where to find. And I know Doncaster Primary and I know us would really love to make sure you feel as kind of confident to parent your kids through this kind of bit of a new challenge as you can. Just before we wrap up, I know we've only got a couple of minutes left, but is there any questions that people want to ask while we're all here together?
No questions.
Thank you, Graham. I feel like someone should bang a gavel. All right, well, if there's no questions.
Sorry, this is Alfred, the father of Yan Yan. I have a silly question. I find that sometimes, because due to the we have our work during the day, and we may not have that much time to spend on internet as our children. They may not spend on internet, but sometimes they hear from their friends. Sometimes their technology, or even they know more advanced technology than me. So how can I control or monitor them in this situation?
I'm so glad you asked, because you've just reminded me of something I forgot to tell you about. Okay, there is something, and I'll put it in the chat. There is something that is called Our Pact. Okay, there's a few different ones, but this is the one I've had recommended. They're not paying me, I promise. Can you see that in the chat? Our Pact, OURPACT. And it's actually software that you can put on the devices your children use to help you monitor what they're using, to help you manage how much time they're on. And again, it's just another tool. Yeah, Our Pact. Yeah, there's just another tool that can help you, particularly if you're, and I know with lockdown, you're trying to work in one room, maybe your children are on a computer in another room, and it can be hard, but there are a few different software or applications. This is one, but have a bit of a look. A lot of them are very inexpensive and they save you a lot of time. Yes, Vanessa.
Can you hear me? Yes. Can I also recommend, if you have iOS devices, the screen time settings? I have a year 6 and a year 8 daughter and they hate it, but they both have restrictions on their phones and iPads, and you can see usage, you can set limits. So they have I started with a limit for YouTube, but then she was getting around that by going on it via Chrome. So now there's a limit on Chrome. And if they want more time, they have to have a conversation with me. So we found that really useful, because sometimes, as you said, as this parent said, sorry, I don't know your name, sometimes they're home before us. And so I'm not in the house always when they're on these devices. So we found that really useful if you have iOS system.
And Vanessa, I think you also just made a really good point, that you put limits on your kids and then they find these ways around them. So, yep. It's never just one talk about technology. It's an ongoing discussion. And when your children do something that they know is wrong and that you know is wrong, try not to yell and shout. Try and sit down and talk about it. And again, logical consequences. And again, if your child keeps using technology in a way that is unsafe or bad for them, or causes conflict in the family, maybe they do need a break. And I know they're all going to hate me. Any of your kids who are listening in are going to be like, but Kate, we thought you were cool. I'm not that cool, kids. I want you to be safe. Yeah. So again, a break from technology is good for all of us, grown-ups, you too.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Kate, for sharing your time with us. I know we all appreciate it. And at DPS, we've loved having you come back every year and run the sessions. So if your child is in year 6, they've had Kate 2 years in a row. And if your child's in year 5, they get to see them again next year. So it's a great program to keep running. So thanks very much.
Thank you. And I'll share that information tomorrow morning with you all.
Excellent. We'll have that available in the next few days.
Great.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys. Have a good night.
Thanks, Kate. That was fabulous.
No worries. Bye-bye.